No species ever forgot the day humanity's patience finally broke. The Voakai delegate was still talking when I decided I had heard enough, though I sat there for another 40 minutes and let him finish. Because that was what I did, what I had always done, what 30 years of practice had made feel almost like breathing. The room smelled like recycled nitrogen and Keth's ceremonial incense. The incense always gave me a headache. It was supposed to signal respect for shared deliberation, according to Keth protocol. I had a headache at least 3 times a week. My pen sat on the table in front of me, engraved brass, compact seal pressed into the side. I had used it to sign 47 treaties. I thought of it mostly in terms of weight, about as heavy as a small and carefully worded promise. I had not picked it up yet because picking it up meant we were close to an agreement, and we were not close to an agreement. We were close to me saying noted, and the Voakai delegate believing that meant we were close to an agreement. There is a difference between those two things. I had spent 30 years constructing that difference. The delegate's name was Counselor Ventarak. He was well prepared and entirely committed to the position that the border realignment his government had unilaterally enacted 6 weeks prior was technically within compact guidelines if you read Article 14, subsection B, with a very specific kind of generosity that I would not have extended to it, but that he had clearly rehearsed applying to it for some time. He was good at his job. I respected that. The way you respect a chess opponent who plays well inside a game you already understand better than they realize. He had been talking for 11 minutes. I was nodding. Nodding was part of my job description, in the way that certain things are part of a job description without ever being written down. I had cataloged 43 distinct nonverbal cues from the species represented in the compact chamber, 43 ways the galaxy communicated. We tolerate you, for now, while it remains convenient. The Voakai had a gesture that functioned as a smile without being one, a relaxation of the upper face, a slight widening around the secondary eye ring, a sound in the back of the throat, low and brief, like someone settling into a chair they had already decided belonged to them. I had timed it across hundreds of sessions. It appeared, on average, 30 seconds after they believed they had secured what they came for. The Keth used to pause, 3 to 5 seconds before answering any question I asked. It was performed deliberation. They had already decided before the question finished. They were offering me the appearance of being heard, which was considerate of them in its way, and I had mistaken it for genuine consideration during my first 2 years of service. Then I stopped mistaking it and started timing it instead. I used it against them in the Hesse Trade revision of 2341, building exactly 3-second pauses into my own responses at strategic moments, so they would feel the rhythm of agreement even before the agreement was on the table. That revision is still the most favorable commercial arrangement humanity has ever signed with a Keth-controlled trade corridor. The Drell were different. The Drell were warm. They tilted their translator nodes toward me when I spoke, a gesture of attentiveness in their protocol, and they called me Conciliator Osai, our patient and thoughtful friend, with a gentleness that genuinely felt like affection until you understood that informal Drell diplomatic language. Patient is a classification applied to things that are waiting for the more important parties to finish. Furniture is patient. Display pieces are patient. Decorative arrangements are patient. I was patient. I had been patient for 30 years. The result of that patience was the compact. 40 species, 8 decades of human diplomatic effort, built first by the people who came before me, and then sustained by the teams I trained, the frameworks I designed, the agreements I signed with this brass pen in rooms that smelled like recycled nitrogen and various kinds of ceremonial incense. It was not a perfect structure. Nothing negotiated across that many decades by that many different minds and agendas ever is. But it held. It had held long enough that other species stopped thinking about it as something that required maintenance, which is either the best outcome a peace framework can achieve or a warning sign that something is quietly going wrong underneath the surface. I had spent the last decade going back and forth on which one it was. Before I continue, I should say something about the Varath incident, because it is part of the record, and because leaving it out would be a particular kind of dishonesty that I do not engage in. The incident report is publicly available. 11 crew members, a misidentified vessel signature on an automated targeting system, a weapons discharge that the Voakai Council classified as a calibration error in automated response protocols, an apology submitted under Article 9, subsection C of the Compact Charter, remediation terms negotiated, resolution documented, case closed. I wrote the acceptance of that apology in 4 minutes. I have thought about that number since. 4 minutes to translate 31 years of a human life, times 11 people, into the language of procedural resolution. 4 minutes to take something that will not fit into any document and put it into a document anyway, because the document is what the compact requires, because the compact is what prevents worse things from happening, because prevention is the work, because the work does not stop. I signed it with this pen. I remember exactly what that room smelled like. I have not forgotten it in 23 years. I noted it. I note everything. That is the part of my job description that is never written down, but that has mattered more than anything else on the official list. After Councillor Tarak's session ended that day, 3 communiques arrived on my tablet during the closing remarks. The first 2 were routine. The third was from a Voakai internal diplomatic relay that had been accidentally included in the open compact channel distribution. The error was corrected within 4 minutes. I had already read it. The message said, apply standard pressure. Humans will negotiate. They always negotiate. I filed it. I had 47 messages with similar content saved in a folder that I had labeled, in my personal filing system, simply as noted. Not all of them were accidents. Many I had gathered over years through the particular advantage of being the species in the room that everyone assumed was too polite to be paying careful attention to what was being said about them. I was always paying careful attention. As Councillor Tarak passed me near the chamber exit, he inclined his head in the Voakai way that signals a session well managed from their side and said, "Until next session, Conciliator Osai, our patient friend." "Noted," I said. He left looking very satisfied. I stood in the corridor with my pen in my hand. I turned it over once in my fingers. I thought about the 47 treaties. I thought about the 11 crew members. I thought about the 4 minutes. Then I put the pen in my coat pocket and walked back to my office. There was more work. There was always more work. The session that changed the final calculation began like every other session I had attended in 30 years, which is to say it began with a species at a podium explaining why something terrible was actually a misunderstanding. The Drell ambassador's name was Vel Aeon. He was the 3rd Drell ambassador I had worked with in my career, and by some distance the most skilled. He had an exceptional memory, a complete command of compact procedural language, and a voice calibrated perfectly to make devastating statements sound like gentle observations on unfortunate circumstances. He stood at the session podium and explained that the orbital action taken over Kepler 7 colony 3 weeks prior had been the result of a misinterpretation of territorial cartographic data. He used the word regrettable 4 times in the opening statement. He used the phrase deeply unfortunate outcome twice. He looked directly at me when he said outcome. 11,000 people. That was the outcome he was describing. He expressed the Drell Collective's sincere and formal apology under Article 9, subsection C of the Compact Charter, and submitted the remediation filing simultaneously, which meant that their legal team had prepared the apology documentation before the apology was delivered in this chamber, which meant this moment had been anticipated and planned for, which was a thing I noted carefully and did not say aloud. The room waited. I was the room. Functionally speaking, the other representatives would follow my direction because they always followed my direction in matters involving human interests, because I was the most senior human diplomat in the compact, and because in 30 years I had never escalated a session to confrontation. My record was clean. My record was, in fact, the cleanest de-escalation record of any senior representative from any species currently active in compact proceedings. This was considered a professional virtue. It was also, I understood sitting in that chamber, the thing that had made the Drell's legal team comfortable preparing that remediation filing before the apology was even delivered. I want to explain the apology economy, because I helped design part of it and I understand exactly how it works. Article 9, subsection C exists because the early architects of the compact understood that incidents between species were inevitable, and that the ability to resolve them without larger conflict required a clear, structured pathway for accountability. That is a reasonable goal. The framework they built was thorough and well-intentioned. What those architects did not fully account for was that structured pathway for accountability would eventually become, in the hands of capable legal teams, a significantly cheaper option than prevention. An apology under Article 9 costs the offending party a diplomatic filing fee, a formal acknowledgement entered in the public record, and whatever remediation terms are negotiated in the follow-up resolution session. In the case of an incident involving a colony settlement, the remediation terms would involve resource transfers, border adjustments, and a formal statement of corrective protocol to prevent recurrence. What it did not cost, under the existing framework, was anything close to what it should have cost. Ambassador Vel Aon returned to his seat after delivering the statement. I looked at my notepad. I looked at my pen. I thought about the 47 treaties. I thought about a folder labeled Noted in my personal filing system. I thought about the fact that I had contributed language to Article 9 26 years ago, sitting in a room with 4 other senior diplomats and a team of legal architects, building the clause that was now being invoked in this chamber as the procedural mechanism by which 11,000 people became a case file with a remediation schedule. I thought about that for exactly the time it took for the room to resettle after Aon sat down. Then I stopped thinking about it and did my job. During the session recess, my tablet showed a message flagged urgent from the Earth Council Liaison Office. The sender was Colin Dre, who served as the closest thing I had to a supervisor, which is a loose description for a role that mostly involved Colin sending messages I would read and then handle without needing his input. He was thorough and well-organized and worked in a building on Earth and had not attended a live compact session in 4 years. He was not a bad person. He was a person who understood the administrative side of diplomacy very well and the human side of it in a way that was still developing. The message had a number in it. I looked at the number for a moment. I placed my tablet face down on the table. I picked up my pen. I put my pen down. I thought about Kepler 7 colony. I had visited it once 8 years before during a compact infrastructure survey, mid-sized settlement, agricultural focus with a processing hub and a small educational complex. The kind of place that takes 2 decades to build properly and another 10 years to feel permanent, to feel like the people there have decided they are staying. I had eaten a meal there. I cannot remember what it was. I remember that the light came through the windows at a particular angle in the late afternoon and made everything in the room look warm and settled. The recess ended. I went back to my seat. Ambassador Vel Aon looked across the chamber at me with the Drell expression that means, "We trust in your established record and your long wisdom and your consistent approach to resolution." I held his gaze. I said that humanity accepted the apology as submitted. I said we appreciated the ambassador's candor and the Drell Collective's commitment to compact remediation procedures. I said we looked forward to the resolution session. The room released. You could feel it happen. The tension that had been sitting in the chamber air went out of it all at once, because I had said what I always said, and the session could close properly, and every representative could return to their offices and send their reports and plan their schedules. I signed the acknowledgement form. I used my pen. I noted the time. Outside in the corridor, I walked to the far end, where a viewport looks out at the station exterior, and beyond it open space. I stood at the viewport for a while. My junior attaché, Owen Marsh, found me after about 4 minutes. He was 29 years old, from a station habitat near Jupiter, and he had very good instincts, which in practice meant he stood beside me at the viewport without saying anything for a while before speaking. "The council is asking for a response to Dre's message," he said. "Tell them I received it." "They'll want to know more than that." "Tell them I received it, Owen." A pause, then, "Are you all right?" I considered the question. I thought about the number in Colin Dre's message. I thought about the warm light through a window on Kepler 7 colony. I thought about how long it had been since I had asked myself that question honestly and waited for an honest answer. "I am going to add a note to the session margin," I said, "a personal note for my own record." Owen looked at me carefully. He had a way of looking at me that was reading rather than watching. "Okay," he said. "Good." I went to my office. I opened the session document on my tablet. I found the margin space beside the entry recording humanity's acceptance of the Drell apology. I wrote one word in that space. Noted. Then the date. Then I saved the file, closed the tablet, and sat in my office for a long time with the pen on the desk in front of me, and the viewport light coming through at an angle that did not remind me of anything in particular. I sat there for longer than I usually permit myself to sit. Then I filed the session document and started on the next thing. 6 weeks after Kepler 7, I was not attending any compact sessions. This was not announced. I did not issue a statement or file a formal leave of absence. I sent Owen a scheduling note on a Monday morning saying I would be delegating session attendance to him for an unspecified period and that he should handle routine proceedings according to standard protocol. Owen was capable enough that this created no disruption. He attended the sessions. He sent his notes at the end of each day. He answered communiques in my name. He did not ask me questions I had not invited him to ask. The galaxy interpreted my absence as grief. This was a reasonable interpretation, given what had happened at Kepler 7 and the scale of it. Other species process loss differently, but they recognize the general shape of it in others. Several compact representatives sent messages of condolence to the human delegation. The Keth Advisory Council issued a formal statement of sympathy with a ceremonial 3-second pause embedded in the audio file, which I found unexpectedly thoughtful. The Volcae sent flowers, which they had apparently researched as a human mourning tradition. The species they sent were not native to Earth and smelled powerfully of something between industrial lubricant and overripe citrus. I kept them on the windowsill until they wilted. I was not grieving. What I was doing was something that looks, from the outside, like a large organization quietly reorganizing its logistics. During those 6 weeks, humanity's fleet distribution shifted in ways that were documented in compact administrative filings as supply chain realignment. Several commercial contracts with Drell-affiliated trade corridors were placed under formal legal review, which is a status that means active and binding on paper, while simultaneously meaning we were building the operational capacity to end them very efficiently if the need arose. Civilian resettlement protocols on 14 colony installations were quietly activated and tested, documented as standard emergency preparedness exercises, which was accurate in the way that many accurate things are also something else at the same time. I wrote most of that documentation myself. During the 6 weeks I was not attending sessions. I'm a very precise writer. My colleague Nora Keene, who ran the secondary diplomatic channel for the outer colony delegations, came to see me about 2 weeks into the quiet period. She was one of the few people in the human delegation who had been working this field almost as long as I had, and she had a way of arriving at conclusions slowly, and then holding them with complete certainty once she got there. She sat across from me and looked at the pen on my desk and then looked at me and said, "You are not grieving." "No," I said. "Then what are you doing?" I thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest and complete, without being more than I was authorized to share at that moment. "Counting," I said. She looked at the pen again, then she looked at her hands, then she said, "Will it work?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. She stood up. At the door she paused and said, without turning around, "Then count carefully." "I always do," I said. Owen came to see me on a Thursday, 10 days into the quiet period. He came to my office and stood across from me, and chose his words with the care he always used when the situation called for it, and said, "There is more specific talk in the junior staff channels than usual." I said, "There is always talk in the junior staff channels." "People are concerned," he said. I looked at him. He sat down without being invited. He had good judgment about when the protocol of waiting to be invited mattered and when it did not. "Tell me what they are saying," I said. "They are saying something is changing. They do not know what. They feel it in the scheduling shifts and the filing volume and the way certain senior staff are working longer hours without explaining why. They are worried." He paused. "They trust you. That is also in the channels." I thought about that. I thought about Owen at 29, running sessions I had been running for 20 years, doing it well, managing junior staff who were younger than he was and who looked to him the same way he had once looked to me. "There was a vote," I said, "on Earth, 3 weeks ago. 42 representatives from all major governing bodies, colonial councils included. They brought a motion to the table and deliberated it and voted on it through the proper process." Owen was very still. "We voted," I said. "That is the part that tends to get overlooked when people talk about us. We do not act without deliberation. We bring things to the table and we discuss them and we reach formal decisions through process. We have always done this." "What was the motion?" he said. "You will be briefed when I am authorized to brief you. I am telling you this now so that when the briefing comes, you are prepared." He was quiet for a moment. "Was it close?" he said. "No," I said. He stood up, straightened his jacket in the way he did when he was composing himself for what came next, and walked to the door. "I'll tell the staff that senior planning is ongoing," he said, "that their work matters and their focus matters." "That is accurate," I said. "Thank you." He left. I turned to the pen on my desk. I sat with it for a while, the way you sit with a thing that has accumulated meaning across years of use. 47 treaties, the weight of it, the history attached to the specific scratch along the left side of the barrel from the session room table in the Farrell Conference Center 14 years ago, when I had been too tired to notice I was dragging it across a metal edge. I picked it up. I held it. Then I put it in the top drawer of my desk and closed the drawer. That same afternoon, I sent one final communique through the official compact channel under my full title, a scheduling notice. I indicated that I would be unavailable for 3 upcoming sessions due to administrative obligations, and that Owen Marsh had full authority to represent human interests in standard proceedings. Urgent matters requiring senior attention should be directed to the Earth Council Liaison Office. I signed it, YOSI, Senior Conciliator, Human Compact Delegation. I looked at that title on the screen before sending it. Senior Conciliator, 11 years in that role. Before it, Conciliator for 9 years. Before that, Associate Diplomatic Representative, which is the rank you hold while you are still learning what the pauses mean, and what the smiles mean, and what "our patient friend" means when it comes from a species that classifies furniture as patient. I looked at the title for a moment. Then I sent the message. That was the last time I used it. I want to be precise about what we sent, because precision is the thing that distinguished what we did from what other species expected us to do, and that distinction is the whole point. Every active compact member received the same document simultaneously, routed through the official diplomatic channel at 0600 station time on a Tuesday morning. The routing was deliberate. We selected a time when all administrative offices across relevant time zones would be staffed and operational. We are thorough people. This is not an accident of our nature. It is a practice we have developed because thorough people do not make mistakes that require expensive corrections. The document was not a declaration of war. We did not call it that. We had spent considerable time finding the right language for it. There is no existing term in any language represented in the compact for what we were submitting, because no species had ever needed one before. We created the term ourselves. The document was formally titled, Formal Withdrawal of Diplomatic Patience, submitted by the Human Compact Delegation, dated, signed, and witnessed. It was 4 pages long. I wrote every word. The first page was a statement of context. It outlined, in clear and plain language, the full history of human participation in the compact from our original accession agreement through the present date. It noted our contributions to framework development, treaty architecture, dispute resolution, and the overall structural maintenance of the compact over 8 decades. It noted the number of incidents involving harm to human citizens or human property that had been formally resolved through compact remediation procedures over that period. That number was in the first paragraph, not buried in an appendix, not softened with qualifying language, in the first paragraph where facts belong. The second page was the appendix. The appendix is the part that other species still discuss when they talk about that morning. Each entry was a margin note from my personal session records, single-line entries dated with a brief identifying reference. 71 entries, 23 years of them, going back to the morning I filed the acceptance of the Varath apology in 4 minutes. The Varath incident, the Karath border dispute, the Malin trade sabotage, the Hessa protocol violation, the 3 separate Volkai administrative documents that had described human diplomatic behavior using the phrase predictably accommodating, the 47 intercepted or inadvertently shared communiques, each cataloged by date and source, each containing some variation of the same essential message. Humans will negotiate, apply standard pressure. They always come to the table. And at the bottom of the list, Kepler 7, the date, the number. Noted. The third page was a statement of intent. 3 paragraphs. It said that the Human Compact delegation was withdrawing participation from all active dispute resolution proceedings, suspending all pending treaty negotiations, and placing all current agreements under formal review pending renegotiation under terms to be determined by the Earth Council. It specified clearly that this was not a withdrawal from the compact itself, but a reclassification of humanity's role within it, effective immediately upon receipt of this document. The 4th page said that compact members had 48 hours to acknowledge receipt. Not to respond, not to negotiate or protest or arrange emergency sessions. To acknowledge that they had read what we sent. I sent it at 0600 on a Tuesday. The Keth Advisory Council acknowledged receipt at 0611, 9 minutes after delivery. By 0630, 4 more member species had sent formal acknowledgments. Owen, who had received his complete briefing by that point and was handling incoming communications with a steadiness I found genuinely impressive, tracked acknowledgments on a tablet in the outer office and updated me every 15 minutes with a single-line status note. By the end of the first day, 36 of the 40 member species had acknowledged. The 4 who had not were the ones with the most to account for. That delay tells you something direct and simple about the relationship between awareness of wrongdoing and the instinct to avoid formally confirming you have received the record of it. The Drell Collective acknowledged receipt at 47 hours and 58 minutes. 2 minutes before the deadline, Owen brought me the notification on a tablet without saying anything, because by that point he understood that I did not need things explained to me, I needed them delivered. I read the acknowledgement. It was 3 paragraphs of carefully selected formal language communicating, without stating directly, that the Drell were prepared to discuss amended terms and expected dialogue to follow. I handed the tablet back. "Noted," I said. Owen nodded once, exactly the right amount. I want to be clear about what followed, because there are versions of this story in circulation that replace what actually happened with something more dramatic and less accurate. The accurate version does not require embellishment. The compact operates on infrastructure, not primarily military infrastructure, though that exists across member species. The infrastructure that matters, the infrastructure that I had spent 30 years learning in precise detail because it was my job to learn it and I am thorough at my job, is economic and legal and logistical. Trade lane licenses, resource sharing agreements, arbitration access credentials, navigation data exchange. The dense, interlocking web of small dependencies that makes participation in the compact structure more advantageous than operating outside it. I knew every part of that web. I had helped build significant portions of it, and the portions I had not built I had studied until I understood them as well as if I had. I knew which agreements were foundational and which were contingent on others. I knew which supply routes would automatically redirect within 6 days if a specific arbitration access point went inactive. I knew which smaller species maintained their alliance with the Drell, primarily because the Drell held licensing rights to a navigation corridor those species depended on for commercial shipping. And I knew the cost of the alternative route, and I knew that this cost was substantially lower than those species had been told, because I had commissioned an independent analysis 14 months before that Tuesday morning. That analysis had been quietly delivered to the relevant species at 06:05, 5 minutes after the main document. The Drell Collective had 17 significant allied species at the start of that week. By Thursday, they had 9. By the following Monday, 4, and 2 of those 4 had sent private consultation requests to the Earth Council Liaison Office, which Colin Dre handled with more composure than I had expected from him. I noted this in his file, which I keep because I keep files on everyone. It was a favorable notation. No human vessel discharged a weapon during any of this. I want to state that plainly and let it sit, not because it changes the fundamental weight of what happened, but because it is true, and it was deliberate, and it is the part of the story that the other species have had the most sustained difficulty understanding. They had built threat response models around human military capacity. They had prepared evacuation protocols and emergency diplomatic channels specifically designated for scenarios involving human military escalation. None of those models had a column for 30 years of margin notes and the precise identification of every structural weakness in a system we had helped construct. Counselor Ven Tarak of the Voakai requested an emergency session with Owen on the 3rd day. Owen attended. He took careful notes. He sent me the summary that evening. Tarak had asked whether Conciliator Os would be available to participate in a framework discussion for re-establishing dialogue. Owen had said that Conciliator Osai was currently on administrative leave. Tarak had asked when she was expected to return. Owen had said he did not have that information at this time. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds before Tarak spoke again, according to Owen's notes. "She trained you well," Tarak said. Owen had said thank you and closed the session. I read that summary in my office with the pen sitting in the closed top drawer of my desk, and I felt something that I identified after a moment of consideration, as the particular quiet satisfaction of the right thing being said by the right person at the right time. By the end of the third week, the compact had begun its first fundamental structural reorganization in 40 years. The reorganization was not something we imposed through force. It was something that happened because the configuration of agreements and dependencies that had held the previous structure in place was no longer configured the same way, and systems settle into the shape that the forces acting on them permit. Water finds the level it is allowed to find. This is not a dramatic truth. It is just how things work. I wrote a note to myself that week, in the personal notebook I keep for things that are not for the official record. It said I built the compact. I knew every load-bearing wall. Then I closed the notebook. Then I went to sleep, which I had not been doing well for some time, and which I found that night considerably easier than it had been. 18 months after that Tuesday morning, I am sitting in an office that does not have the compact seal on the door. My title has changed. I'm not going to describe it here because titles are shorthand for things that are more important than shorthand, and what matters is the work, and the work continues. The work always continues. That has not changed. It is, in fact, the one constant I have found in 30-plus years of doing this, through every shift in circumstance and structure and role. The work continues, and it needs doing, and someone has to do it well. What has changed is the room. I requested a different office after the reorganization was formalized. This one is smaller. The viewport is positioned differently, and the light comes through at an angle I am still adjusting to after all these months, which is either a sign that I am slower to adapt than I used to be or a sign that I am paying attention to different things. I have not decided which. The pen is on my desk. Same pen. Different desk, different room, different door. I did not throw it out, and I have not filed it away somewhere permanent. I have thought about why, and I have arrived at no clean answer, and I have stopped trying to force one. The compact exists. It is important to say this clearly because some of the accounts that have been written about the reorganization period describe something more like a collapse, which is not accurate. The framework has been substantially revised. Several agreements have been renegotiated under terms that are more honest than the originals about what each party is actually providing and what each party actually needs in return. Several others have lapsed and have not been renewed, and the parties to those agreements are managing their relationships through bilateral channels instead, which is workable if not ideal. Some species have withdrawn from active contact with human diplomatic offices. This is their right and their choice. Some of them will return when the calculation changes for them, when the cost of staying withdrawn becomes greater than the cost of engaging under new terms. I have estimates for when that happens for each of them. The estimates are in a folder on my personal system. The folder is not labeled "Noted." I chose a different label for this one. Some species strengthened their relationship with us during and after the reorganization. Several that had been compact members for decades, but had always remained at the edges of the network, never quite central to anything, came forward during the 3 weeks after the document was sent and requested closer bilateral ties with the human delegation. The feral were the first. I had always found the feral to be a careful and precise people, and they had been observing the dynamics of the old compact structure for longer than they had chosen to say. And what they witnessed during that period settled something for them about where they wanted to stand. I had lunch with the feral senior representative, a diplomat named Elvira, 4 months after the reorganization was formally complete. She was the first feral diplomat to attend an informal meal with a human compact representative in 11 years. Partway through the meal she asked me, with the directness her species is known for, and that I find professionally refreshing, whether I had planned the entire sequence of events from the beginning. I told her that planning is the primary substance of my work. She asked whether I had known it would succeed. I said that certainty of outcome is not something people in this profession are generally granted. I said you build the analysis as carefully as you can. You prepare with as much thoroughness as your resources allow. You make the best decision available to you with the information you have at the time. And then you send the document at 0600 on a Tuesday morning and you find out. She was quiet for a moment, the feral way, which is different from the Keth pause. The feral quiet is genuine processing. Then she said that her people have a term for what I had done in their language. It translates approximately as, the patience that was a preparation the entire time. I sat with that. I told her I preferred to think of patience as a form of infrastructure investment. She found this very funny. We finished the meal. I have met with her 3 times since, and each meeting has been productive. The thing the galaxy has gotten most consistently wrong, in the accounts I have read and the conversations I have been part of, is the framing that we lost our patience, that we reached a breaking point, that something in us finally fractured under the accumulated weight, and what followed was the consequence of that fracture. That framing is not accurate. Patience does not snap. Patience is not something that holds until it gives way. Patience is a choice, made deliberately, over and over across time, based on a calculation about whether the cost of that choice is justified by its returns. At some point for us, the calculation changed. The choice we made on that Tuesday morning, and the choice the 42 people made in the vote 3 weeks before it, was not a failure of control. It was the conclusion of a policy that had reached the limit of what it could productively accomplish. We did not lose our patience. We closed the account. The galaxy will continue calling it a loss of patience because that framing is easier for them to hold. It places us in a category of behavior they already have language for. The calm creature pushed past its limit, finally reacting. They understand that story. They have told it about humanity in various forms since our first contact session. The patient species, the accommodating species. The species that always comes to the table and signs the document and accepts the remediation terms and files the note and goes back to work. They needed that story to be completely true. It was never completely true. There was always the folder. There were always the margin notes. There was always the pen in my hand and the calculation running in the background, quiet and precise, updating itself with every session and every communique and every 4-minute acceptance document I signed. I had a conversation with Owen about this, about 8 months into the new period. He had been promoted by then, managing his own delegation work, doing it well, which I had expected from the day he sat down in my office without being invited, because he thought something mattered enough to risk it. He came to my office periodically still, less formally now, and we talked about things that were partly work and partly the kind of conversation 2 people have when they have been through something significant together and are still understanding the shape of what it was. He asked me that day whether I regretted the patience, the 30 years of it, all the sessions and the notes and the accepted apologies and the signed documents and the 4 minutes and the Verath acceptance and all the rest of it, all the long accumulation of cost. I considered his question longer than I usually consider questions. Then I said no. I said, you have to let something be worth saving before you can decide that it is not. We allowed the compact to be worth saving for 80 years. We built it from the ground up. We maintained it at genuine cost to ourselves. We showed up in rooms that smelled like other species' ceremonial incense, and we nodded and we noted, and we signed the documents, because we genuinely believed that the structure we were building served a purpose worth the cost of building it. We were not foolish in this. We were not naive. We were making a reasonable long-term calculation. And then the calculation changed, and we made a different one. 30 years of believing something is worth protecting, and then deciding that protecting it requires restructuring it fundamentally, is not failure. It is evidence. It is the evidence that you tried honestly, that you gave the arrangement every reasonable opportunity to work on the terms it claimed to be operating on, that when you finally moved, You moved from a position of complete and documented knowledge of everything that had led to that point. That is not weakness. That is the opposite of weakness. I told Owen that the 71 entries in the appendix were not a record of damage sustained. They were a record of preparation completed. Owen was quiet for a while in the way that means he is thinking rather than waiting for a space to speak. Tarek asked about you again, he said eventually. I know. He uses different language now when he talks about you. I noticed it in the session transcripts. He used to say patient. He does not use that word anymore. Good, I said. Owen smiled. It was a good smile, the kind that has something real behind it. He stood and straightened his jacket and left. I sat in the office for a while after he was gone. I thought about the 47 treaties. I went through them in my head, the way I do sometimes, the way you go through the names of places you have spent significant time in, checking each one for what it still means to you. The Feral Resource Compact, renegotiated, still active. The Hesse Trade Revision, due for review in 3 years. The Yolen Border Accords, which held through everything and which I remain proud of. The Verath Acceptance, entry number 1 in the appendix, 4 minutes, signed, filed, noted. I thought about Kepler 7. I thought about 11,000 people and the light through a window at a particular angle in the late afternoon. I thought about warm light and what it costs to lose it. The pen is on my desk. I have not thrown it out. I pick it up sometimes and hold it, not to write with but just to feel the weight of it, the specific weight of 47 treaties and 30 years and 1 folder and 71 margin notes and a Tuesday morning at 06:00. It is an ordinary object. It is just brass and engraving. But objects accumulate the history of how they have been used, and this one has been used for the work of building things, and I am not finished building things. On the morning I sent the document, I signed it with my thumb. Biometric identification, the old way humans authenticated important decisions before we developed the tradition of ceremonial pens and engraved seals. Quick, clean, unambiguous. The pen stayed in the drawer. I did this deliberately. I had decided at some point in the weeks of preparation that the pen belonged to a specific kind of work, the work of construction, of good faith negotiation, of sitting across from another species and trying honestly to build something that serves both of you, the work of patience as an investment in a structure you believe in. That work is not finished. I want to be clear about this because I think it is the most important thing I can say in any account of what happened and what came after. The work of building durable things between different peoples across different needs and different histories is never finished. It only changes form. It restructures. It finds new terms, more honest ones, and begins again on a foundation that has had its weak points identified and addressed. There are new agreements in early stages right now. Several of them are the most transparent arrangements I have worked on in my career, specific about costs and benefits on both sides, clear about what happens when terms are violated, designed by people who have read the appendix and understand what thorough record-keeping looks like when it finally becomes relevant. The Feral Agreement is the furthest along. There are 3 others in progress. Owen is handling preliminary discussions on 2 of them, and he is handling them the way I would want them handled, which is to say carefully and thoroughly and with very good notes. He told me recently, with the dry tone he has developed over the past year and a half, that the new junior staff have begun to understand what the word noted means when he uses it. I told him that was excellent professional development. He agreed. I wrote something in my personal notebook last week, not for the official record, not for any filing system or delegation archive, just for me, because I have always been writing for me in the end, even when the audience was a compact session chamber or a diplomatic channel or a 4-page document sent at 06:00 on a Tuesday morning to 40 species simultaneously. I wrote, we did not break. We did not snap or fracture or lose something we had been carrying. We finished a calculation that had been running for 23 years, and we acted on the result of it. We finished a sentence, and then we started writing the next one. That is who we are, a species that finishes sentences before starting new ones, a species that deliberates and votes and builds things carefully across decades and keeps thorough records and shows up, keeps showing up, shows up again after everything, until we have decided together through the proper process that the showing up needs to look different than it did before. A species with a folder of 71 margin notes, and the patience to wait until the folder was ready before opening it in front of the people who needed to read it. The galaxy thought patience was our defining characteristic. Patience was our method. The defining characteristic was always something else. It was the 30 years of careful work before the Tuesday morning. It was the vote that was unanimous. It was the 4-page document written with precision and sent at the exact right moment. It was Owen Marsh, 29 years old, sitting down in my office without being invited because he had decided something mattered enough to risk the protocol.